The air in my parents' dining room smelled of rosemary roast beef and quiet contempt. Crystal glasses chimed, forks scraped Limoges china, and every sound felt like someone tapping a glass to announce that my brother's engagement was the evening's uninvited spectacle. My name is Olivia Carter, 32, and this is the night my own family told a room full of strangers that I am, in their expert opinion, a nobody. Across the table, my mother, Margaret Carter, adjusted her pearl earrings with the finesse of a woman who has perfected the art of pretending everything is perfect. She flashed the smile she reserves for country club fundraisers and said, just loud enough for the 8 dinner guests to hear, "Olivia works, somewhere in publishing." Nothing exciting, bless her heart. Laughter spritzed out like cheap perfume. Even the roasted carrots seemed to shrink under the steam. I swallowed hard and stared at the monogrammed napkin on my lap as though it contained instructions on how to disappear. Beside Mother sat my brother Daniel, Brookside Heights golden boy. His fiancée, Sophie Bennett, radiant in silk, reached for his hand. She was meeting the Carters officially for the first time, and tonight was supposed to celebrate them. Yet somehow the conversation kept orbiting back to my apparent lack of orbit. "Publishing," Sophie repeated, genuinely curious. "What do you do exactly?" Before I could answer, Mother waved a manicured hand. "Oh, sweetheart, it's nothing glamorous. Olivia proofreads manual, something like that." She sipped Cabernet, eyes bright with the satisfaction of having clarified my insignificance. My father, Henry, cleared his throat but said nothing. He never does when Mother performs these small executions. He crawled up my neck, but I've learned to keep my composure. You can't bleed in front of sharks and expect mercy. I tilted my wineglass, letting the ruby liquid swirl, and wondered once again why I still accepted these invitations. Habit? Hope? Masochism? The meal marched on. Margaret bragged about Daniel's partnership, his lake house, his future children who would undoubtedly inherit the Carter brilliance. Each boast was another paper cut across skin already raw. Then came the moment that landed like a gavel. Mother leaned in, conspiratorial. "Dan, we must make sure your sister gets a seat near the kitchen door at the wedding. We wouldn't want her to feel out of place with the executives, now would we?" Forks paused midair. Even Daniel's smile faltered, but he didn't correct her. My breath caught. "Kitchen door, really?" The words ricocheted inside my skull, stirring every childhood memory of being benched so Daniel could shine. I glanced down the table at Sophie, her brows knit in confusion. She touched her phone beneath the white linen cloth, thumbs moving subtly. I didn't know it then, but that quiet tap-tap would become the tremor that split the ground beneath my mother's glass-perfect reality. You might ask, why didn't I slam the table and shout my truth? Because pain taught me patience. Secrets, when timed right, land louder than any outburst. And I was saving my voice for a moment they'd never forget. Under the clink of silverware, my mind replayed every dismissal. The birthday where my poetry award lost to Daniel's JV trophy, the Christmas they framed his MBA while my first print byline collected dust, the voicemail I left last year, announcing a milestone they never returned. Each scene stacked like kindling waiting for a spark. I straightened my spine and forced a smile so polite it hurt. "Mother's right," I said, tone soft enough to lull them into security. "My job is quite ordinary." Inside, the words tasted like ash. Outside, I let them believe. Let them bask in their fiction a few minutes longer. Margaret lifted her goblet in triumph, oblivious to the storm cloud gathering behind Sophie's inquisitive eyes. "See? Olivia understands. Not everyone needs to conquer the world." Her proclamation dangled in the chandelier light, sparkling with condescension. But here's the truth Margaret never bothered to Google. For the past decade, I have written stories strangers underline in library books, stories professors assign in seminars, stories that earned me national awards and a film deal. I fly coach because I like observing people, not because I can't afford first class. I rent a modest apartment overlooking the Hudson because the view reminds me why I escaped. Those facts sat inside me like diamonds hidden in plain sight, quiet, unbreakable, waiting for daylight. Sophie set her phone face down, eyes shining, but said nothing yet. Another slice. Do you still read those little books? Mother asked, dabbing her lips. Remember when she used to scribble stories instead of playing outside? Such a phase. My jaw tightened. I caught my reflection in the silver water pitcher's dark, shoulders squared, a woman holding back a tidal wave. A question pulsed behind my ribs. Will I let them write this version of me forever? Tonight the answer will begin to reveal itself, but not yet. Suspense, like good wine, needs time to breathe. Daniel rose to toast. To family, he announced. The table applauded. Margaret's diamonds glittered. Sophie smiled, but her glance flickered toward me, quiet empathy laced with anticipation. As the toast ended, I folded my napkin with surgical precision, hiding the tremor in my fingers. My heart pounded a slow, relentless rhythm. Wait, 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 wait. Because every great story knows the power of build-up, and every overlooked daughter learns the art of dramatic timing. They think this is another forgettable dinner. They think I'm still the girl scribbling in notebooks no one reads. They have no idea the ship of their assumptions is already taking on water. Stay tuned. The real banquet is about to begin. And you listening know, have you ever sat silent while someone wrote your narrative for you? Did you stay quiet, or wait for the perfect page turn? Before I was the woman quietly correcting everyone at the table with my silence, I was the little girl who tried so hard to be seen. I grew up in Brookside Heights, where appearances meant more than affection. Our home was pristine white columns, a manicured lawn, seasonal wreaths, but what happened behind the front door was less curated. Inside, my mother Margaret choreographed our lives like a pageant. She dictated outfits, birthday themes, even smiles. And at the center of her carefully staged world was my brother Daniel, 3 years older, always louder, always shinier. Daniel was the varsity athlete, the valedictorian, the golden child who got the front row seats and the framed accolades. When he hit a home run, the whole neighborhood heard about it. When I published my first short story in our school's literary magazine, my mother said, "That's sweet. But what kind of job will that lead to?" It didn't start as cruelty. I don't think Margaret meant to hurt Menno at first. But neglect leaves bruises too. I remember being 8 years old, rushing into the kitchen, clutching a crayon-colored story I'd written about a girl who could talk to clouds. My teacher had scrawled, "Excellent work," in red ink, and added a sparkly sticker. I beamed. "Mom, look what I wrote." She glanced over, mascara wand in hand. "That's nice, Olivia. Put it on the counter. I'm trying to find the right earrings for Daniel's science fair." That story sat on the counter for 3 days. By the time I found it again, it was water-stained and forgotten. I should have learned the lesson then. In our family, applause only followed Daniel. But I didn't stop writing. I wrote in secret late at night under the covers with a flashlight, in the margins of notebooks, between math problems I didn't care about. In middle school, I won a regional short fiction award. I remember clutching the certificate on the ride home from school, heart pounding. When I told my parents, my mother sighed. "That's nice, but we'll have to miss the ceremony. Daniel's team made the playoffs. You understand, don't you?" I nodded. I always nodded. But that night, I pinned the certificate to the back of my bedroom door and cried into my pillow while the house echoed with cheers from Daniel's baseball highlights. By high school, the pattern was clear. I was the quiet one, the sensitive one, the girl who always had a book but never made waves. My awards in journalism, poetry contests, and statewide editorials were mentioned, if ever, with the same tone one uses to comment on a child's drawing stuck to the fridge. Senior year, when I told them I'd been accepted into a writing program in New York on full scholarship, my mother's face fell like I'd just announced I'd joined a cult. "New York?" she said flatly. "You'll never make it in a city like that. Why not stay in Ohio? Study something practical. Teaching, maybe, or nursing." Even my father, who rarely took sides, said, "It's an expensive place to fail, sweetheart." But I didn't care. I was done waiting for approval. I wanted distance, not just physical, but emotional. I packed 2 suitcases, my laptop, and a stack of rejection letters I'd already started collecting like armor. When I boarded the bus for New York, no one came to see me off. My mother sent me a text. "Be careful, Call if you run out of money. Not good luck. Not, we're proud. Just a warning. The silence only grew from there. During college, I blossomed in ways they never knew. I found professors who nurtured my talent, friends who read my drafts with excitement, mentors who pushed me to submit to real literary magazines. I published essays, short stories, poems. My work started to appear in places that mattered. But at home, I was still Olivia who moved away and edits books or something. I stopped correcting them. What was the point? Every call home became a tightrope. Don't talk too much, don't brag, and always ask about Daniel. He was climbing corporate ladders, buying real estate, going on ski trips with law partners. His LinkedIn profile got more family clicks than all my published work combined. And yet, despite everything, I still went home twice a year. Thanksgiving and Mother's Birthday. Not because I needed their validation, but because, somehow, I still believed there might be a moment, just one, when they would look at me and see the full picture. But it never came. There was the Christmas I sent them a signed copy of my debut book with a handwritten note. This means everything to me. I'd love for you to read it. I found it still in its shipping envelope, unopened, tucked behind the guest room bed 6 months later. There was the time I called to say I'd been nominated for a National Literary Award. Mother said, "That's nice," and asked if I could help find a caterer for Daniel's engagement party. I began to split in two. Olivia Carter, the published author who gave keynote speeches at Columbia and signed books in London. And Olivia, the daughter, who always sat at the far end of the dinner table, smiling like nothing mattered. But the divide grew too big to ignore. Especially when I found out they hadn't even told Sophie, the woman marrying into our family, what I really did. At that dinner table, when Sophie looked up and asked, "What kind of books do you work on?" I realized they had erased me so well, even their future daughter-in-law had no idea I existed beyond some vague clerical job. And the worst part? I almost played along again. Almost let them write over me one more time. But fate, or perhaps irony, intervened. Sophie tapped her phone, looked something up. Her expression changed. And in that moment, my silence had an expiration date. The truth was no longer mine to hide. The past had paved every inch of this road. And the reckoning, long overdue, was waiting just one seat away. Have you ever been pushed out of your own story? Because I have. But not for much longer. When I stepped off that Greyhound bus in Manhattan at 19, everything I owned fit in 2 suitcases and a canvas backpack. I remember clutching a crumpled subway map and standing in the middle of Penn Station like a deer in a financial jungle. The city buzzed around me loud, impatient, alive. It was the opposite of Brookside Heights. And for the first time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt unformed. Like maybe I could finally decide who I was going to be without Margaret Carter deciding for me. But let's be honest. The beginning wasn't glamorous. My scholarship covered tuition, but barely anything else. I split a shoebox apartment in Bushwick with 2 other girls. One was an art student who welded metal sculptures in the kitchen, and the other was a dancer who practiced routines at 2 a.m. in the hallway. I worked mornings as a barista in Union Square, afternoons I took classes, and nights I wrote. Every spare second was for writing. Poetry, essays, short stories. Half of them were garbage, and the other half I sent to literary journals with fingers crossed. The rejection letters piled up like snow on my desk. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Every no just sharpened my focus. And then, in the spring of my sophomore year, a professor handed me a copy of a short story I'd submitted to class. He'd written just 3 words at the top. "You found it." That same week, he forwarded my story to a friend at a small but respected literary magazine. A month later, my piece appeared in print. A tiny column, no picture, no fanfare, but I held that issue like it was a newborn child. I slept with it under my pillow for a week. I never told my family. Not when I got my first paid writing gig. Not when I landed an editorial assistant position at Stone and Wick Literary after graduation. Not even when Eleanor Price, the fearsome editor known as the Wolf of West 45th, walked into my life. Eleanor was notorious in the publishing world, blunt, brilliant, and brutally honest. I was terrified of her at first. She tore apart my early drafts like a lion with a ribeye, but she saw something in me. "You don't just write pretty words," she said one night after a brutally long revision session. "You write what people are afraid to say out loud. That's your power. Don't waste it trying to be likable." That changed everything. I stopped writing to be approved. I started writing to be understood. The first real breakthrough came with a short story series I titled Unseen Daughters. It explored the lives of women quietly surviving inside the shadows of their own families. No one in Ohio noticed. But New York did. Readers wrote in. Editors called. My email inbox once a graveyard of, "Thank you for submitting," but started to ping with interest. At 27, after 3 years of working nights and weekends, I completed my first manuscript, Beneath Silent Waters. It was a collection of interconnected stories about familial expectation, betrayal, and identity. No one wanted it at first. Too quiet, one agent said. Not commercial, another shrugged. But Eleanor didn't let me give up. She edited every word with me until it bled. And then finally it sold. Not for much money, but to a respected independent press. I remember holding the first bound copy in my hands, running my fingers over the embossed title. My name was right there. Olivia Carter. The reviews came slow. Then suddenly. The New York Times called it a quiet earthquake. The New Yorker named me one of the top debut voices of the year. And one chilly October morning, I woke up to an email from the Penn Faulkner Foundation. I'd been shortlisted. I cried. Alone. In my Brooklyn apartment. And then I went to work like it was any other Tuesday. That's the thing about success built in the shadows, it never stops feeling surreal. The book tour took me to 12 cities. Then London. Then Berlin. I met readers who said my words gave them language for things they couldn't say. I met girls who whispered, "You wrote about my mother." I met women who said, "You helped me forgive myself." I came home from those events to my quiet apartment, to handwritten notes, to royalty checks, to award nominations. And still I never told my family. Because deep down, I knew what would happen. My mother would say, "That's nice," and ask if Daniel's firm was mentioned in the acknowledgments. My father would smile politely and change the subject. And I wasn't strong enough yet to feel that again. So I built 2 lives. One public, where I was praised and published. And one private, where I was the girl who still worked in publishing somewhere. I wore both masks so long I almost forgot which one was my real face. But something shifted the year my second novel, The Weight of Unsaid Things, was released. It started as a quiet launch, small buzz, early reviews. Then came the reader blogs, the YouTube breakdowns, the Instagram reels quoting my characters. 3 months in, the novel landed on the New York Times bestseller list. 6 months later, a major film studio optioned it for adaptation. I had my first real taste of Hollywood screenwriter meetings, casting emails, red carpets. Yet at Thanksgiving dinner that same year, my mother asked if I had considered applying for an HR job at Daniel's firm just to have something stable. That night, I sat in the guest room flipping through photos on my phone, fan mail, speaking engagements. The night I shook hands with Margaret Atwood and I realized something. I didn't need them to see me anymore. But I also knew they would. Eventually. Because the truth, when you bury it deep enough under silence, doesn't die. It waits. And when it rises, it shakes the room. Which brings us back to Sophie, to the quiet clink of her fork as she stared at something on her phone with growing disbelief. She was reading my bio. My awards. The pages they never turned. The stories they never asked about. And all I could think was, finally, someone at this table was about to see me. And maybe, just maybe, they'd make the rest of the room look too. Have you ever succeeded so quietly that the people closest to you missed the whole story? I did. But the silence was about to break. "Excuse me," Sophie said softly, her eyes locked on me with a look I hadn't seen all night. Not polite interest. Not sympathy, it was recognition. I hope this isn't rude, but I have to ask. The table stilled. My mother paused mid-sentence about flower arrangements. My father's fork hovered, suspended over his mashed potatoes. Sophie lifted her phone just slightly. Are you Olivia Carter? The author? Every sound in the room vanished. I could hear the distant hum of the refrigerator and my own heart pounding in my ears. Margaret blinked. What are you talking about? Sophie turned the screen so everyone could see. It was my author profile Penguin Random House, right there in bold. Below it, author of Beneath Silent Waters and the Weight of Unsaid Things. National Book Critics Circle Award winner. Penn, Faulkner finalist. Sophie looked at me again. That's you, isn't it? The picture matches. Daniel leaned in, eyebrows raised. Wait. Seriously? He took the phone from her and began scrolling. Holy, is this real? All eyes turned to me. And I knew this was it. The moment I had imagined and feared in equal measure. The two versions of me, the one they dismissed, and the one the world had applauded, were colliding in the center of our mother's dining room. I nodded once, slowly. Yes, that's me. My father blinked. But, you write novels? Literary fiction. Sophie added helpfully, still reading. Critically acclaimed. It says your second book was optioned for film? I exhaled, not from relief yet, but from years of breath held too long. It was. Last year. Margaret's voice cut in, brittle and defensive. There must be some mistake. Olivia's never said anything about being some famous writer. I'm not famous, I said calmly. But I am published, and I did tell you. Many times. My voice didn't rise, but something in it must have carried, because my father put down his fork. You did? When my first story was in the Atlantic, I called home. You said it was nice and then told me Daniel had gotten a new car. They said nothing. When I got my first book deal, I mailed you signed copies with an invitation to the launch event. You never responded. I found them still in the shipping box in the guest room when I came home that Christmas. Margaret's face flushed. We were probably busy. It was the holidays. You always had time for Daniel's promotions. For his awards, his vacations, but never for mine. Sophie was still holding her phone. There's a whole Wikipedia page, Margaret, she said gently. And she was just featured in the New Yorker's 40 Under 40. She looked at me. You gave a lecture at Columbia. That video's got over 1 million views. Daniel's face was unreadable. Why didn't you tell us? Really tell us? I looked at him, at all of them. Because every time I tried, it didn't matter. You never asked. You never wanted to know. It was easier for you if I stayed small. My father whispered. But I didn't know. I met his gaze. You didn't want to. Margaret stood abruptly. So what now? Were the villains in one of your little books? I held her eyes, steady. I write fiction. But the emotions are real. The daughter no one noticed? The child always overlooked? Yes, that part is me. The silence was suffocating. And then Sophie broke it again. Your books. They moved me, she said softly. I read Beneath Silent Waters last year with my book club. We cried. We talked about the girl in the story for hours. She paused. I didn't know she was real. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. So while we thought you were proofreading cookbooks, you were getting standing ovations? I gave a small smile. Something like that. My mother looked lost. But, if you're doing so well, why do you still live in that tiny apartment in Brooklyn? I couldn't help it, I laughed. It's a 2-bedroom in Park Slope with an office. And I take the subway because I like reading underground, not because I can't afford a car. Sophie flipped her phone around again. Here's Olivia accepting the Penn Award. That dress is stunning, by the way. On the screen was a photo of me in a black evening gown, standing behind a podium. My father's expression softened into something I hadn't seen in years. Pride. Daniel leaned forward. I'm sorry. I had no idea. I never even thought to ask. I nodded slowly. It's not just you, you were the favorite, Daniel. That's not your fault. But it meant I never got space to be anything but your shadow. Sophie took a breath. If it's okay to ask, the second book. The one about the sister who leaves and builds a life in secret. That's not just fiction, is it? I met her eyes. It's fiction. But the truth? It lives between every line. Margaret sat slowly, her voice quieter now. You never said you wanted us to read your work. I swallowed hard. I begged you, just not in the way you understood. Every call, every signed book, every invite. You didn't hear me. So I stopped trying. My father reached for his glasses, his eyes damp. We failed you. I see that now. I didn't answer right away. Because this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about finally being seen. Margaret tried again, voice cracking. So, what do we do now? I looked around the table. At Sophie, whose quiet curiosity had lit the fuse. At Daniel, searching for his sister in someone he thought he knew. At my father, finally listening. And my mother, her face pale with the weight of a reality she had refused for too long. You don't need to do anything, I said. I'm not here to be validated anymore. I just want to live my truth loud enough that you can't pretend not to hear it. The wine was forgotten. The roast beef cold. But for the first time in my life, I was not invisible in this house. And that was a beginning. In the weeks after that dinner, the air around my family shifted slowly, like furniture being rearranged in a house that had stood the same way for decades. I didn't expect instant healing. I didn't want performative apologies or forced affection. What I needed was something quieter, something harder, change. 3 days after the dinner, a package arrived at my Brooklyn apartment. The return address was my childhood home. Inside, I found brand new copies of both of my books, not the dusty ones I'd mailed years ago, but freshly ordered ones from an online bookstore. Tucked between the pages of Beneath Silent Waters was a card in my father's handwriting. I've read this twice, once for the story, and once for the voice I should have heard long ago. Your words are beautiful. You matter. I'm proud of you. Love, Dad. I held the note for a long time before placing it on my desk. Not because I didn't believe him, but because it was the first time I truly did. Daniel started texting me more often. At first, it was cautious, asking for book recommendations, sending links to articles he thought I'd like. Then one day, he called. Jessica and I were wondering, he began, sounding uncharacteristically nervous. Would you do a reading at our engagement party? I blinked. A reading? Of my work? Yeah, he said. Something meaningful. You've got fans, Liv. Turns out I'm one of them. I laughed, a short, stunned sound. Are you sure? It's your party. Exactly. And I want people to know who my sister really is. Not the version we've been selling all these years. The night of the engagement party, I arrived at my parents' house and felt different. Not nervous. Not bitter. Just grounded. Jessica greeted me at the door with a warm hug and whispered, I've never been prouder to Google someone. The backyard had been transformed, string lights, candles, a small podium near the patio. As guests mingled, my mother approached. She was wearing her classic pearls, but her posture was softer. I put you at the main table, she said, without fanfare. With us, and Jessica's parents. I nodded. Thank you. And I asked the bartender to have your favorite white wine on hand. Sauvignon Blanc, right? It was a small thing, but to me, it meant everything. Later that evening, I stood at the podium and read an excerpt from The Weight of Unsaid Things. The passage was about a woman who finally finds her voice after years of silence, told in a quiet monologue that echoed with unspoken pain and quiet resolve. The crowd was still as I read, and when I finished, they clapped not politely, but deeply, authentically. When I stepped down, I saw my mother dabbing the corner of her eye with a linen napkin. My father looked like he had aged 10 years and unburdened 10 more. Your words, he said simply. They do something. They stay. Later that night, while guests danced and champagne glasses clinked, I found my mother standing alone in the kitchen, staring out the window. She didn't turn when I entered. Your reading was beautiful, she said softly. I never knew you could write like that. I leaned against the counter beside her. You never asked. She sighed. You're right. I was so busy trying to craft the perfect family image. I didn't realize I was cutting out one of the strongest parts. I said nothing. Let the silence stretch, honest and bare. I told my bridge club about you, she added after a moment. Marilyn Jenkins' daughter teaches at Ohio State. She's assigned your novel in her modern lit course. That made me smile. Did you tell her I'm your daughter? Her lips curved slightly. I did. And it felt nice. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't a hallmark moment. But it was a start. I'm not asking for everything to be fixed overnight, I said gently. But if I'm going to stay in this family, really stay, things have to change. She nodded slowly. I understand. No more pretending I'm not who I am. No more sidelining my life like it's a hobby. And no more comparing me to Daniel. My mother looked down. You always seemed like you didn't need us. I needed you to see me, I said. Not fix me. Just see me. For once, she didn't try to explain it away. She just nodded again. As I left the kitchen, I felt lighter. Not healed, but no longer carrying the weight alone. The following Sunday, my father invited me for dinner again. Just us, he said. I want to talk more. I started reading The Weight of Unsaid Things. I think I'm beginning to understand some of the silence in this house. I brought dessertleman tarts from my favorite bakery and we spent the evening talking about literature, memory, and all the things we used to avoid. At one point, he asked, do you think Margaret will ever fully come around? I thought for a long moment before answering. Maybe. Maybe not. But if she tries 7 slowly, I'll meet her halfway. And she did try. She joined Jessica's book club. She read Beneath Silent Waters with a highlighter, calling me after each chapter with questions and nervous insights. Was the father character based on your real dad? She asked once, voice tentative. No, I said. But the silence was. There was a pause. Then. That's fair. Progress, I learned, doesn't always come in fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in quiet acknowledgments, changed seating arrangements, or a glass of wine poured before you have to ask. And for the first time in years, I didn't dread the holidays. I looked forward to them. I wasn't seeking approval anymore. I had built a life full of meaning without it, but now, I welcomed the chance to share it. Because being seen doesn't mean you stop being strong. It means you no longer have to carry strength alone. So, what about you? Have you ever been underestimated by your own family, by the people who should have known better? And did you stay quiet? Or did you write your own story until they had no choice but to read it?